Hey everybody, this is Joe Turner, and I have a fascinating three-part interview series coming up with Michael Penny. He is the Colorado City Manager out of Castle Pines, who's also the chairman of the ICMA's Credential Advisory Board. On top of that, he is a founding member of the American Association of Municipal Executives. So we're going to have a wide-ranging discussion on all things related to ICMA, the AAME, executive board elections, the credential. It's going to be fascinating. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. Again, it's going to be a three-part interview series that's going to unfold over the next 3 weeks. And I think it's going to be a very informative and thought-provoking discussion that you're not going to want to miss. And before we jump into that episode, one final reminder, tomorrow is the deadline for the founding member signups. If you want to join the American Association of Municipal Executives, again, Thursday, July 25th is the deadline. Founding members will be entitled to lifetime perks and benefits that regular members will not get. And that includes discounted memberships. That includes discounts on future online courses and trainings. It also includes exclusive and or priority access to various events and so forth and so on. So if you want to be a part of this historic journey that we are on, this historic movement, if you want to join more than 450 people who have already signed up to be founding members of the AAME, you need to go to community.aame.org today and sign up. That is community.aame.org. Go there, sign up today, join our private community, and start building those relationships we've been talking about. Start building that connectedness. So once again, go to community.aame.org and sign up today. All right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America, racking up over 200 ratings and reviews on Apple in its first year of existence. We had over 90,000 downloads, and we're closing in on 100,000 downloads as I speak with this interview today. I have a very fascinating guest with us. I think you guys are going to find this conversation really illuminating. I have Michael Penny. He's the Castle Pines, Colorado City Manager, about 30 miles south of Denver. Michael's been an ICMA member since about 1995. He was actually featured in one of the annual reports that are available online. And he's also a founding member of the American Association of Municipal Executives. And I think that's going to be a pretty interesting conversation to have, talking about his journey to where he felt comfortable joining the AAME. And also we're going to talk in detail about the credentialing process, because he sits on the CAB, the Credentialing Advisory Board. I think it's about 15 members or so. I don't know the exact number, but he's been involved with the ICMA credential for quite a long time. And he reached out to me recently and said, "Hey, Joe, I think you kind of have some of your thoughts on the credential are a little off base, and I think I disagree with some of your takes on it, but I also agree with you on some of the other aspects." And so we're gonna get to that today. It's gonna be a really fascinating conversation. But before we do that, Michael, why don't you give the audience a brief introduction into your career path and how you got into the profession and how you got to where you are now, and we'll dive right in.
Fantastic. Well, first, it's a pleasure to join you, and I appreciate you being willing to take the time to hear what I have to say, and it'll be a very interesting conversation. A little background before I get it to me. I listen to podcasts a lot as I go to the gym and drive to work, like so many people do. And I honestly don't remember now who the first person was that turned me on and said, "Hey, have you heard this City Manager Unfiltered?" And said no, but listened to, downloaded your podcast and listened to the first one. And I've been an avid listener ever since. And one of the reasons I had reached out to you is because I listened to it, and probably like most listeners, I agree with some, and I'm like, "Oh, what about this?" And I'd love to be part of every conversation that you have. But now I'm an avid listener, and I have shared your podcast with ICMA employees, my elected officials. I know you've got a lot of elected officials that listen now, as well as some of my staff and certainly my colleagues here in Colorado. So I appreciate all the work that you do on that front. I've been in the business for, I think, about 33 years now. I have an undergrad in criminal justice, and my master's is a master's in public administration. I have worked in 4 municipalities as manager and the city of Boulder, where I really started my career. Almost all of my time was in Colorado. Started in Boulder, went to a small town, I know you worked at two small towns, Ouray, Colorado. I think back in the day it was probably 800 people or so, and then stayed in the mountains, went to Frisco, and went to Littleton, Colorado. And now, as you pointed out, I'm at the city of Castle Pines, and I've been there 6 years and really hope to finish my career there. It's a great community and a lot of growth that's coming on there. And as you said, I've been a member of ICMA for a long time. I became a credentialed manager, I believe, in 2008, and then joined the board, I believe, in about 2013. And this year, I'm the chair of the Credentialing Advisory Board. And I guess lastly, as you said, I'm also a founding member of AAME. So I will talk later about how I see them coexisting and how I believe I can support both organizations.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. But before we do that, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. It's always fascinating when I find out that people got turned on to the podcast through somebody else, and spread the word and what have you. It's still a very surreal experience to be a podcast host,
I'll
and
bet.
it's a trip. It's been a very amazing experience, as I've talked about before, and I've been very blessed and fortunate to have gone through this process. It's been a lot of work, obviously, a lot of hours put into it, but it's opened up so many doors and opportunities as a result. It's honestly, I don't know if nervous is the right word, Michael, but it's kind of a trip to have chairman of the CAB, ICMA loyalist. I don't know if that's the right word or not, but on the podcast, willing to discuss these issues with me, because the journey I've been on has been really fascinating. And what I mean by that, in the narrow sense, is that we just launched the American Association of Municipal Executives, and we have over 400 people signed up. And what I found fascinating about this journey is some of the people that I thought would be hardcore, definitely in on the first day, didn't sign up. And some of the people I've never heard of, never interacted with, never had a post like, don't even know who they are from Adam, they joined, right? So that's the first thing that's been
Mm-hmm.
fascinating. The second thing is I've had individuals who are gung-ho pro ICMA join AAME, and they've said, hey, Joe, I like the credential. I think the credential has value. It's important to me. I've had ICMA people who are supportive of the organization who say, yeah, I think the credential is kind of fluffy and I don't know, I think it's a waste and all that. I guess we'll unpack some of those details. I've had individuals who can't stand the ICMA, but they're members because they feel they have to be, and they won't join the AAME yet because they're afraid of the political retaliation or possible blowback as a result of that. And then I've had people who've just never been a member, or they left a long time ago because they didn't like the direction the organization's going and they joined in. So I have this really wide array of individuals who have joined AAME. And it's so fascinating to me to have these different perspectives, and then to have, I've had individuals say, Joe, have you ever sent an invite out to Mark Ott or anybody else on the ICMA to come on the podcast? And truthfully, I've never really directly done that, but I have an open door. If anybody wants to be on, they can be on. And you're an example. So, what do you think about this whole lay of the land I just sort of put out there for the AAME founding member demographic, or people who showed up and are not showing up?
So my general belief is that both organizations, first of all, I think there's enough people, enough managers out there, assistant managers, up and comers, et cetera, that there's plenty of people who are going to be interested in either organization, or certainly both organizations, right? And the scope of service delivery for AAME versus ICMA currently is, I don't know if there's a chasm between them, but they have one. The way I simply describe it is ICMA has a focus of the profession, and your organization, AAME, has a focus on the professional,
Yes.
right? And so to me, those are both needs that are out there. And that's one of the reasons that I'm a member of both organizations, and I'm excited to be a founding member of AAME and also watch where you take this. And my continued participation and membership will obviously, similar to ICMA, is going to be based on where the two organizations go, and do I believe that there is more value than less in either of those organizations. And so when you talk about the varying people who are either joining AAME or not joining, I think it just comes from the spectrum of managers and assistants, et cetera, that are out there. And we'll probably delve more into this when when or if we talk about, the hiring practices, that what makes a good manager is so varied across the spectrum that what their personal interests are relative to your ask in this question varies just as much as we vary around the managers. There's conservative managers, there's more liberal managers, et cetera. And so I'm not really surprised that you continue to hear that. The hope is that you get enough members that you really can get the momentum going, have the financial wherewithal to accomplish the goals that you and Micah have been talking about. And those of us that have joined or haven't joined get to watch and say, oh, that's awesome. I like the direction it's going. And, again, more people join. But I really don't see that there doesn't need to be adversarial relationship between the two organizations. I know some of your podcasts are really focused on some of, I don't know if this is an appropriate term, but the misdeeds or perceived misdeeds of ICMA. And, there's nothing wrong with calling an organization out or individuals out that don't adhere to, whether it's the tenets or just come across as hypocrites or don't do the right thing. We all do that in some respects in our lives, right? In our
Right.
jobs or with our spouses or whatever. So I really see space for both organizations, and we'll probably chat more about that as we really delve into it.
Yeah, that's an important distinction that you made, because I've had people express a desire to see AAME to be collaborating with other organizations or with the ICMA or what have you. And I have to tell you that publicly, at least on the public facing aspect of the ICMA, they have been, in my opinion, surprisingly magnanimous or supportive of AAME and the public sphere, right? As far as
Mhm.
the whether it was the Pat Martell audio I played in a previous episode, whether it's the reports I'm getting about other members of the executive board, the current president making some conciliatory comments and what have you. I've gotten, we have founding members of the AAME who have already been having conversations with some of these folks at the ICMA, and I'm getting good reports back. Okay. And if we're going to stay in our lane and focus on the city manager as a professional, and ICMA is going to stay in their lane and focus on the council manager form of government and advocating for that, and those are going to be the two tracks that we're on, you're damn right I could see us coexisting and working together in that regard. But I want to make something very clear, and I don't want to get super hardcore about this right now, and maybe we'll unpack it a little bit more. But I don't ever see the AAME collaborating or working with the ICMA in a meaningful way unless or until the James Freed situation is resolved to some degree of satisfaction. And I think there needs to be accountability on that. I think people need to be held accountable for what has happened. And I don't know if you really want to get into that in this conversation, Michael, at all. I don't know what your position is on that, because we talked about the credential, obviously. But if the ICMA can own up to the wrongdoings that I think they've committed with respect to how they've handled James Freed and that whole entire process, then yeah, I think we can have a meeting of the minds and cohabitate, so to speak, or whatever, But I got to tell you, and I don't want to derail this conversation, but I haven't seen anything yet really out of the ICMA that tells me that they fully understand or are prepared to make amends for what has happened with the James Freed situation.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I mean, obviously you're higher up in the organization than most people who've ever been on this podcast, being on the cab. I don't know if you have any thoughts, if you want to unpack that, or if you want to just sort of stay away from it. So I'll defer to you.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I'm high up in the organization. I'm a volunteer on one of their many committees. So I just would say that with somewhat tongue in cheek. Going back to the beginning of that last topic there, I think the Pat Martell, I felt like it was a positive statement. I know that was one of your last podcasts, but I think it acknowledges what I hope that everyone ultimately will acknowledge, which is both can exist. And I think she in that talked about GFOA. I'm also a member of the Colorado City County Management Association. I'm a past, worked my way through that board and past president there. I've been a member since I became a manager. I think it's a great organization. And I also think that in this, I have no place to say this, but I think AAME shouldn't be partnering out of the gate, because you have to find your way first. You have to figure out what your focus is. You start trying to partner with people, and pretty soon you can get diluted, and you don't know, you may lose your own way. I had lunch today with a consultant, and I was telling him about the podcast, and I told him about your very first podcast, which was about contracts. And to me, that was one of the ones that got me hooked, because I do think the vast majority of managers do a really piss poor job on negotiating that first contract. We get excited about the job. It's an opportunity. It's the excitement and momentum around that. And you don't stand back because you're in the honeymoon stage and think about the fact that at some point you might be getting divorced.
Right.
And how do you protect yourself in that? So again, I don't have a place to say that other than I think you should focus on yourself, meaning the organization, and beyond that. On the James Freed, I am going to defer in the sense that I have listened to your podcast, but I've never read or thought anything else beyond listening to a podcast. And so, like anything, I've got one side of the story, if you will. I would say that, based on that, I think my takeaway is it is disappointing, and that may not be strong enough for you, in how the ICMA board and the executive director responded in that. The value and a lot of the details, again, I wouldn't go into. But I think it's important also. I mean, the organization is made up of us, right? The board of directors is city managers, assistant city managers, and they are volunteering their time. And I always start with a place of best of intent. And so I would hope that the board members are really focused on being responsive and thoughtful about how we handle any ethical complaint and the organization as a whole. And I think, if we get into the future of the organization, it's still us. To me, there's really no they out there, because it could be, and it is, one of the board members is a rep from Colorado, right? And so it's all of us working together to make this organization the best that we collectively think it could be. And the direction is going to go in a way I may not like it as much one year and another. And so I totally respect where you are in terms of the James Freed situation. And we'll just have to wait and see how that particular item plays out. And there's a lot of time in the future, right?
Right.
None
True.
of us are going anywhere. And so there's a chance that you will or will not ever see a need to collaborate with them. Maybe the collaboration is through the Credentialing Advisory Board. I mean, one of the things that I hope we get a chance to talk about toward the end is the constant, I think, and I'll jump ahead a little bit here, but I think one of the challenges in hiring managers and councils making smart decisions about who they hire and not 100% just following the recruiter is that that could be AAME, it could be me, the collective we, how do we educate and inform our constantly churning elected officials, whether they lose elections, they don't run again, they're term limited, whatever that may be, they quit, on the value of the profession, ICMA, the value of the professional, AAME, and understanding why it's important to hire a professional city manager and the value that that professional manager can bring to the organization to support the council, et cetera. Because a lot of these councils have never hired a manager. Their entire term could be the same manager, or the reverse. And I've shown I know there's only a couple on the YouTube, but I've shown that to the class I teach at CU Denver grad school. You got some crazy councils out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so even in that arena, helping educate on the council manager form of government and the value that the profession has, because I don't know that this was the term you've used in the past, but we are not a dime a dozen, right? And the value that we can bring. And when you've got that good mesh with the organization between the council, the manager, the staff, and obviously the community supported by the council, you're running on the proverbial 8 cylinders. I think I went beyond.
No. That's great, because we're having a conversation, like I said, and I want people to understand that this is a very nuanced conversation to have. I've articulated this before on some LinkedIn posts and some other podcasts, but I'll do it again here. I started posting actively and building my platform on LinkedIn back in late August, early September of 2022. I didn't say anything critical. In fact, the only posts I ever had about ICMA before I started talking about James Freed were positive. I think they were talking about either the MIT managers in transition I'd heard good things about, and I'd also heard nothing but great things about their advocacy for veterans, the veterans program with ICMA. And, I've also had individuals on this podcast who are supportive of ICMA, including Ben Effinger with the whole ICMA veterans program and what have you. I'm not going to try to silence voices or just make it a one way, group think here where it's only my opinion gets heard. I like different opinions. I like oppositional viewpoints because I think that makes conversations interesting. I think it makes people think a little bit more. And unfortunately, I think in society right now, we're too used to having one dimensional conversations because people are claiming that they have been emotionally traumatized every time they hear something they don't like. And, we're canceling people and so forth and so on. So I don't, it's interesting. And this is a quick little segue or a tangent here. Even since I've become the president of AAME and we opened the doors, I've had 2 or 3 managers reach out to me via LinkedIn or via email and offer some constructive feedback or criticism about my tone or my demeanor or something I had written. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And I think that's great. I think that's great because at the end of the day, I don't ever want to be so disconnected from the membership that I lose track of what our purpose is or what the pulse is on the people, right?
agreed.
And it's kind of gets back to what you said a minute ago. One of the most common things I hear, if you read my LinkedIn or my podcast reviews, it's even on there. It's like one of the most common feedback points I get is I don't always agree with Joe Turner, but I agree with but I appreciate the fact that he's willing to say some of these things, and
Yep.
and I jokingly say that if someone agrees with me about everything I say, they must be crazy, So
Well, and the algorithms in social media push that mentality, right? The groupthink mentality. And so having an open, honest dialogue where you do disagree and it's how you disagree, right? And the same conversation we
absolutely.
have with our councils, you know, this is another tangent, since the advent of cameras, I would argue that the vast majority of council debate and dialogue is telling the public how they're going to vote on something, not having a very democratic discussion and debate.
The
If
merits,
you,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
if I don't agree on it and I'm looking to get my fourth vote, my job ought to be, hey, Joe, you really should support my view because blah, 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 instead of me staring at the camera going, I'm going to vote yes or no for these particular reasons. And, I've been around long enough that pre cameras, nobody was grandstanding to the camera. And now there's so much more, I mean, my words, grandstanding in
that's
there
a great point.
and I think that clearly there's so much out there. I mean, we just had a assassination attempt on a prior president, which kind of is the culmination of what the hell are we doing out there? We need to ratchet all this rhetoric back and get back to a good discussion. And I a lot of what I don't always agree with you on is the attacks on ICMA, and some of that is because I'm knowledgeable around the credentialing advisory, and others of it I just don't know enough on it. But I appreciate hearing you. I mean, I don't think there's been a podcast that you've done that I've turned off going, I just don't enjoy this one. Every one, even if I'm talking back to it at the gym, it's it's a it's it's a play. That's where I typically listen to you is early in the morning. It's 4:30 in the morning at the gym, and look forward to Wednesday mornings. And tomorrow's Wednesday, so I know it's coming on. So it better come on.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right. I can't miss. I got
can't miss.
every week I'm on that hamster
Yeah,
wheel.
yep. You got to know that Michael Penny is listening to that at the gym on Wednesday morning. So anyway, we probably should get back on our
Well,
somewhat agenda.
I want to go back to a point that you made earlier about the members of the ICMA executive board and being volunteers. And yes, that is true. But I do think there is a little bit of double standard hypocrisy when it comes to some of these conversations when it comes to the ICMA executive board. And let me unpack that. What I mean by that is many of our peers, including myself, have been quick to lament or criticize the apathy that exists in the electorate when it comes to local elections with low voter turnout. We have lamented or complained about the lack of time or effort our governing body members put into reading their packet materials and being up to speed on the stuff that they're voting on. And many of those individuals are putting in far more work on their governing bodies than the ICMA executive boards with respect to their volunteer responsibilities on the board, right? So there's been a little bit of some of the feedback I get is, hey, Joe, these ICMA executive board members are volunteers. They can't really be in the know on every little thing. And yes, I do agree to that to some extent. And again, I'm coming back to the James Freed angle a little bit.
Hmm.
But the reality is you are in a political position by virtue of being on the executive board. And I don't mean that in an R versus D type deal, but
Yep.
you are in a position that's designed to hold the city manager, if you will, the CEO of the organization, accountable for how he or she is running that organization. And you don't just get to say, hey, I'm really busy with my job and this is a volunteer thing. And you can show up for the international junkets and go play golf, in London or whatever the case may be, but then act like you don't have the ability to put the time in, especially on something as important as one of our own fellow peers who's being publicly censured and having their career, the reputation tarnished and their career possibly damaged. You know what I'm saying? And so I
Yeah.
think there needs to be a greater understanding, because some of the feedback I get from some of the folks who are AAME founding members is this notion or this idea that a lot of the executive board members are wanting to be on the executive board because it checks a box for them on their resume or what have you, and they're not really there for the actual purpose of holding the staff accountable for how it's running the organization.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you agree with that or if you understand where I'm coming from, but that's some of the feedback I get and some of the constructive criticism I have about the current state of the ICMA executive board. They are elected to the board, and we can talk about the election process, which I think is a sham, but they are elected to the board to hold the CEO and staff accountable, and I don't think they're doing that.
Yep. So no, I don't disagree. And the way, and my analogy for that is, I've been on. I'm a past president of the Colorado Municipal League Board. I'm a past president of the Colorado City County Management Association, and both of those, the CML has both elected and appointeds on it, but the CCCMA is the state chapter of ICMA, and so it's all of us on it, right?
Right.
It's appointed managers and assistants, etc. And I have always, and I'm on another board that's made up of all appointeds right now as well. And the way I look at that is I am the elected official, right? And so in all of those situations, it's not my job to delve down into the administration, but it's to set the policy and, as you pointed out, to hold the executive director or whatever organization it is accountable to meeting the goals and policy directives of the board. And so, again, going back to my assumed best of intent, I would hope that all of our executive board members for ICMA are walking in there acknowledging that it's not about checking a box on their resume, but it's really about supporting the council manager form of government, whatever their personal goals for the organization, not for themselves. And that what they're doing is, going back to our discussion around the council, is they're having discussions amongst the executive board, trying to, if I'm an advocate for shifting and moving more into I'm just making this up, into an education focus for ICMA, my job is to convince enough executive board members to join me in that so we can set a policy and then hold the executive director accountable. And again, I would hope that our executive board members are thinking themselves as policymakers, because they all work for policymakers. So it's
Right.
pretty easy to flip that switch over. And again, I'm not going to respond on the other because I just am ignorant, and you can give me a hard time that I probably should, I can't list every board member that's up there. I don't know their background. I haven't spent really any time. I'm the guy who writes my annual check and go to the conference, and I attend the local stuff and all that. But I'm not the guy who has been reading as we were talking right before that we started recording, their annual reports. I am curious on where the annual reports are, because we put out annual reports, and it seems like that's something an organization should do. But anyway, yes, I hope that people are doing it for the right thing. And I really believe that as managers, I mean, we know what it takes to run the organization. We've been running the organization, and we also know what it takes to work with the elected officials. So when you move into the quasi-elected official role, being elected by the membership, and we can talk about that later, again, I genuinely hope that all of those folks are really focused on how do we create the best ICMA that we can have. And
Right.
assuming at some point you're going to have a board, I don't know what you guys are going to do for AAME, that whoever is there is focused on that same thing. How do we make this organization the best that it can be?
Well, yeah, man, there's a lot there to go. There's so much ground here, and we're gonna have we can have a long conversation. Maybe we will have
This
a long
might be a
conversation.
part 1 and 2.
Might be, right?
Right?
Be, um, you know, getting back to this idea that these members are on the executive board. Okay, so this is a very important point I want to make, because we talked earlier about possibly collaborating, getting through this whole James Freed situation, have that resolved, and what have you. And I want to make something very, very clear. And this is not a personal thing for me. I don't know anybody on the executive board. I've never had any. I didn't even know James Freed at all. I never met him, never heard of the guy until he basically clued me into his story. So my agenda is to protect and represent a manager who I think has been wronged. Okay. And everything that I've read and seen about the case indicates to me that the ICMA is wrong. And again, maybe somehow they'll be vindicated or something like that, and maybe they'll go to trial and win or what have you. I don't see that, because I'm so plugged into the case, and I know the details. I've had James Freed on the show talking about a situation. He's talked about depositions, right? He's talked about the actual depositions and things that they've said under oath. And my thing is that it's not personal from me against a member of the executive board. It's just that I am an absolute junkyard dog when it comes to advocating for a manager or someone I think is wronged. And in this case, James Freed is now a founding member of the AAME. And so I'm going to go to bat for him. And I think what I would like to, because I know ICMA exec board members and staffers listen to what I do, and I know that, and we know this, right? So so I
Agreed.
know they're listening to this podcast, and I want the ICMA executive board members who are listening to this podcast, and the ones who have been members elect who are going to be seated at the conference, I want them to understand something, that I come from a political world environment where, as a political operative and what have you, and it's incumbent when you're in that world to make sure you put the elected officials on a position, right? You hold them accountable and make them be accountable for taking a certain position or explaining what their position is. And so this idea that you can get elected to the ICMA executive board and that you don't need to be accountable or explain where you stand on an issue beforehand or why you took a vote on an issue after the fact, that is a non-starter for me. You don't get to hide and say, "Oh, I don't owe you an explanation." You know what I mean? And so what I want the ICMA executive board's members who are listening to understand is that as we get closer to October, if we get to the trial in October for James Freed, which I don't think that's going to get to, because I think it's just going to be too damaging for the ICMA to let it go that route. And I know you don't want to speak to that because you don't know all the details, but I will tell you that I am going to ratchet up the pressure in ways that the ICMA executive board members cannot even comprehend or understand. They've never experienced, because they've never been in a position of being in a quote unquote quasi political position, such as the ICM executive board member, where you have somebody like me with my skills and experience who's willing to hold them accountable and put them on a record. Does that make sense, Michael?
It absolutely does. And so a couple things that come to mind. One is, one of the reasons that I joined AAME is because I do appreciate, while I can't say I fully understand, and I'm not sure you have the roadmap laid out, but the idea that you are going to come and assist in whatever fashion the word assist means, the actual professional. And I know part of that you've acknowledged and I apologize, I forget who you were chatting with, that there's always a limitation on resources, whether that's time or money.
Right.
And so figuring out at what level can you actually, if I'm treated or mistreated by my counsel and I call you up, do I meet the level that you say, okay, I'm going to come champion for you? But so that to me is a place of interest that I'm going to be watching where you take the organization, because I think that is a need out there. I don't even claim to be able to really understand what it means to me, but it feels like a need. And then going back to the ICMA executive board, again, without knowing the details and who they are and those kind of things, I think of myself as in the manager role. And one of the things I think, if you were to interview my mayor as an example, if I make a mistake, I'm the first one to put myself in the corner and go, I blew it.
Correct.
We did whatever. And so, again, I would hope that the executive board, and we all say stupid things and we all put things in writing that we wish we hadn't. And I've got an embarrassing moment in Littleton where I texted the pro tem, not the mayor, and shouldn't have done any of it, and it still makes me turn red. But you acknowledge it. And so you hope that the executive board is members, if there was any inappropriate or, things that are not above board, because again, it's us, right? It's not even about ICMA tenants. It's about the fact that we are professional managers. And as you pointed out, we're now holding at the ICMA executive board level, we play a different role, and we should be holding ourselves to the highest standard possible. And to the extent that somebody's able to look in the mirror and go, oh crap, I shouldn't have said that about somebody, or blah, 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 rather than getting offensive about it, we should all own it, because that's what we do in our day jobs. And so it's not like you go off to board meeting and you suddenly have the ability to pretend like you're a different person or act a different way. The integrity and ethical morals that you have, whatever those are, should carry through in any part of your life, right?
Right.
So yeah, so I absolutely understand, and that's part of what I see in the value of AAME, and the fact that James Freed has risen to that level, and it happens to be ICMA. It'll resolve itself in whatever way it resolves itself. To me, the larger, keeping the eye on the long-term prize, it's James Freed is the moment in time, and not
to dismiss it or minimize it.
Yeah,
no,
exactly. Not at all. But really thinking about that's going to be resolved at one point, one way or the other. The longer term vision of what you have for this organization is what I'm interested in. Is there a role that AAME can play in helping educate elected officials? Because I think
yes,
certainly in Colorado,
there is. Yep.
And nationally, I would assume it's fairly similar. And there's probably a dozen other areas. And again, you working with whomever you work with to narrow down that scope so that it's actually doable and you can move the ball in those areas. That's really what I'm interested in. Don't hold you any hard feelings about picking up the James Freed ball and running with it and being as hard as you feel like you need to be, because to me that says who you are, and that you're going to fight. If you're fighting for James Freed that way, if you take that same passion and energy and you say, hey, we're going to focus on educating elected officials, I'm going to sleep well at night knowing you're going to be carrying that same level of energy into that or whatever. And then depending upon what your focus is, again, going back to my earlier statement, I can decide as an individual manager, is that an organization I want to be part of?
Right.
And the answer is going to be yes until it's no. And
right.
Again, I'm going to beat the horse on assume best of intent, that I'm excited to see where this goes. And again, it's not about I'm agreeing with you 100% of the time. It doesn't even have to be 50% of the time. If there's a component of what you're doing that I value, I want to be part of that, because it's filling a need that I don't see happening
anywhere else. Right. Yeah. I do want to unpack a little bit on the AAME, but I also want to go back to ICMA. And I don't want to beat this. I just want to put a point on this, and I don't want to beat it to death. But here's the thing. Okay. If you are an ICMA executive board member right now, and I don't care if you weren't there when this censure was voted on and happened, but if you're on there now, you should have read the depositions that have taken place. Is that a fair statement on my part, Michael?
I would think so. I mean, I'm going to continue to...
Or maybe I shouldn't put you on the spot, because but let me say my position, Michael. I'm here my position.
Yeah, okay? Go for it.
My position is you are a sitting executive board member for the ICMA, then you should have already read the depositions that took place that were for Mark Ott, Jessica Cowles, Martha Prego, and whoever else that was depositioned, right? They gave statements under oath about the process. So if you are on the ICMA executive board today, you're sitting there, you've been elected, you should have read those transcripts by now, okay? And so I'm going to posit to you, based off what James Freed's told me in the podcast interview, okay, about what was in those depositions. That gives me great pause and frustration by what has happened since those depositions were given, because I have not seen the organization take any steps to make amends or right the wrongs that have been committed against James. And again, I know I'm putting you in this weird position, Michael, and
Mhm.
it's really delicate. I'm trying to be fair to you, but also hit home this point, because since those depositions, and I want the audience to understand this, since those depositions were taken in June or July of 2023, as I understand it, you've had the conference in September, October, where Martha Perego was feted with a retirement celebration. You have had her name put on an award just a couple months ago in March. You've had Jessica Cowles is been promoted still within the organization. And I want the people to understand who are listening to this podcast, the ICMA members, that this has all happened with the under the current executive board leadership. And they know what's in those depositions. And so when those depositions come out at trial, there's going to be a reckoning, because James Freed in that podcast explicitly stated that Jessica Cowles misrepresented her interactions with him in her staff report to the executive board. And he also stated something to the effect that Mark Ott agreed that certain things happened that shouldn't have happened, but he wasn't aware that it happened. But yet, where was the accountability? There's no accountability recognized by this organization. And I don't want to repeat the whole thing. You kind of
Yeah.
alluded to the Pamela Antill and the Fraser text message exchange. There was no accountability on that. There was no public statement by the executive board calling out that behavior, apologizing. So, people say one of the more, and I'm gonna go a little rant here, because one of the more frustrating things I've experienced through this process, Michael, is I've had people say, "Man, you're really, really hard on the AAME, or your tone. You're really aggressive. You need to let it play out in court." I lost some people when I called for the termination of Mark Ott. Right? They said, I can't abide by that. I'm disconnecting from you." And I want to say, well, where were you when they were putting the press releases in James Freed's community, right? When they're sending letters to James Freed's governing body and basically saying that he's being excommunicated from the organization with a public censure, that he's dishonest, that he's unethical. You think they were trying to get him a raise?
Yeah.
Were they trying to get him promoted to something? No, they were trying to get him fired. They were trying to hurt his career. So don't give me this crap about, oh, you don't like my tone, or I'm being too hard on a CEO, when you got the organization itself parachuting into communities and putting out press releases calling out this bad behavior. But yet when the organization has its own bad behavior, it's crickets. There's no accountability. End of my little rant there, Michael, because at the end of the day, if you're on the executive board, you are going to be held accountable. I'm going to hold you accountable. And they shouldn't let Mark Ott did not retire, quote unquote, retire, spend time with his family. We all know what that was. That was him walking out, getting pushed out of the organization, and they're trying to do it in a safe base. But he's still going to be with this organization now for another year, and it's unacceptable.
So what I would expect is, and I have to project my manager experience. When the city gets sued, we have our attorney, we hold an executive session, and there's a discussion about, in your example, the depositions or whatever. So I would expect and hope that the executive board has been fully briefed in some type of executive session by a defense attorney, and they would be taking direction and action primarily, if I think again about a city situation, or following the advice of the defense attorney. And sometimes that is no comment. I mean,
sure,
we're right in there. And it's a matter of, and I'm not saying this happened, I'm trying to stay neutral in this as well. But, the way, if as a hypothetical, if the defense attorney or the attorney for ICMA says, "Hey, look, you guys, you can't say anything. We need to, we're in a lawsuit," but their decision was, we need a change of executive director, then maybe he didn't retire on his own, and they took the action that they could take. Again, not saying that happened, because
No, I'm tracking you, buddy. Yeah, for sure.
So, so there is, I want to loosen the reins a little bit on them, because the defense attorney may be communicating to them. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I would agree with you in the sense that the executive board both should be held accountable for any actions that they were not in service of the organization, The executive director, just like a manager, should be held accountable, and the city council ultimately is held accountable for whatever policy that they're making. And whatever happens, again, in the James Freed, once that decision or closure comes, I would really hope and expect that the executive board takes a deep breath, looks at that, debriefs it, and says, what did we really blow? And the we could be the organization, it could be the board, and sets policies or procedures in place to get back on track to making it the best ICMA that it can be. And then that is ultimately decided by who those executive board members are. I know part of the conversation in the past has been, has ICMA turned more political and not nonpartisan, I don't know if nonpartisan is the right term, but, lost its way on some of your podcasts in there. But again, I would come back to, that's, the board is made up of us.
Right.
And that's the direction that we're going. And I know we're going to chat about elections potentially later. So, but anyway,
do you want to jump? Do you want to jump into elections now? Do you want to comment on that?
That's
a nice segue.
We could. I mean, we started on credentialing, but
yeah, I know.
We'll end on credentialing.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm just gonna gonna tease the listeners. They signed up to listen to the credential conversation, but they got something else, so they'll just have to wait till part 2 maybe or something. I don't know.
Or you can put the time marker in there if they just want to fast forward. So on the election piece, I don't have a whole lot to add in there, but just for the listeners' edification, I have been both an applicant for the executive board, and I have been asked to represent Colorado just this year to be on the interview panel made up of, I think there was about 24 people on, I forget exactly how many. And so
you mean the interview panel to look at the candidates who are wanting to be on the executive board, correct?
Yeah. So I will tell you as an applicant, I felt like and maybe we'll end with your concern around how the election just ends up with one person for the members to vote with. But I will say on both sides, both being the applicant and being on the interview panel group, I'm sure there's a more technical name. I apologize. I don't know what it is. I really felt like they were both fair processes. I worked really hard on the application, reviewed the organization's strategic plan, thought about my involvement and what I've done with ICMA. I think I knocked it out of the park. I was not chosen, and that's fine. But then I would say the same thing on the other side. We interview. I believe we had one person who asked the questions just for efficiency. It was a Zoom type call or whatever media was used. And then there were 2 applicants, and we picked one after that, and there was discussion amongst the board, and we had good representation. I think you had interviewed somebody who felt like they didn't have good representation because not a lot of the interview panel showed up. Where I think we collectively, again, can do a better job, and maybe this is a state organization focus, is to get more people interested in applying for it. I'm generally okay with the interview panel piece. I do, and again, let's chat about the election piece at the end. But, but for example, on what we just had was we had 2 applicants. So for our region, it rotates between Texas, then manager, then assistant manager. There's enough Texas managers that they can outvote everyone in the rest of the region.
Right.
So about 10 years ago,
and that's part of the rotation. That's what's called the rotation agreement. Right.
Yep. And it's worked great. I think I was on the CC. I think I was president the year we approved that in Colorado. And I think it's worked very well through that process. But the challenge really is getting enough people interested that review or interview panel has, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 people to really interview and ask questions and make a determination based upon, whether they're representing Oklahoma or Colorado or Texas, about whatever their concerns are and what they're looking for. And granted, I was asked to represent CCCMA, which represents the Colorado managers. And so at one level, there's a lot of pressure.
Sure.
because I haven't gone out to talk to the Colorado members to say, hey, what do you think about ICMA, and what are you looking for in the next executive director representing us? That's probably something that the local chapters, the state chapters, could really improve. This is coming out as I'm thinking as I'm talking, to really beef up either the question side or even in the filtering within the states when they're going to put somebody forward, is really figuring out, is this person somebody that we want to support and move forward? But I don't know that it's the best election process, but I really don't think it's predetermined. And granted, I've had one experience on either side, but I would disagree with that. It's kind of and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth trying to remember our podcast, but it's not a good old boy. It's not predetermined.
I've used the word rigged.
Okay.
I've used the word rigged. I've used the word sham. I've used scam,
And
and I've used the idea that it's insiders picking their own successors, essentially. And
yeah,
that's to me, because here's the thing, and I know you, and I want to give you ample time to push back on this too, because obviously I want to hear opposing viewpoints. But when I say this isn't just Joe Turner speaking about it, right? Because I have many people who believe that ICMA in large part is, there's cliques within the ICMA, and that if you're in a clique, then you kind of, you get taken care of. But if you're not in that clique, you don't. And so there is a belief that if you're part of the clique, the establishment or whatever, you have a leg up when it comes to getting appointed to these positions or to committees and what have you. And so to me, the appearance of it's very troubling when you can have individuals go through I'm gonna say secret, because it's not open to the public, right? These
okay,
it's not like the general membership can go and attend these candidate
correct.
review sessions, right? And
Yep.
so and they don't even know who the candidates are. Like, based off, you're talking about the interview I did with Graham Mitchell.
Okay.
And it was
Yep.
really me. I was Graham Mitchell, that there was a couple of people that did not attend, or a couple of representatives that did not attend, but it was me that kind of went to the bad cop side and criticized that. I don't want to throw Graham under the bus, because Graham's an ICMA guy too. I mean, it's like, so it's fascinating to have you guys both as founding members. But I was the one that was kind of riding hard on that, because if it's executive board process and you have representation, then you should be there representing the group that you're there, and processing it. But at the end of the day, Graham was sharing with us, and I think this is true for all the different regions. Nobody even knows who the candidates are. So the membership doesn't know who the candidates are. All they know is who was the final person picked, right?
Yep.
And that's troubling to me, because it's just very opaque and not very transparent. And to kind of get back into the main issue for me, is when you have a process whereby, and again, I'm going to use the word insiders, are picking the lone candidate that people get to vote on. Well, we have no idea, and I shouldn't say we, because I'm not even an ICMA member, I've never been, but the ICMA members don't even have a clue what that person stands for or represents. And I'll give you a classic example of where we're at right now, right? We don't know where they stand on the James Freed situation. We don't know where they stand on the job performance of the CEO. And, I've called for the termination of Mark Ott, because I look at his track record, and I go, on what metrics are we saying he's been successful? We talked about the annual report. We still don't have an annual report up for the 2023 fiscal year that ended in June 2023, over a year ago. We still don't have an annual report. They should be working on the 2024 annual report right now, and they don't have the 2023 up. You go to the website, you can't even find the 2021 annual report. You can't even find, I think, the other one of the other years on there. It's like, so to me, it's like, if you're running for the executive board, but nobody knows what you stand for or what you believe, how's it not just turned into a freaking, high school class president popularity contest when it's being completely controlled and ran by insiders? Do you see what I'm saying?
So, no, yes and no.
Okay.
So so
Nope.
so first of all, I think ICMA could, your point about what does this person stand for, and not just whether it's James Freed or annual reports, but what's their policy direction related to ICMA? Where do they think ICMA should go into the future, right? That what metrics do they plan to hold the executive director accountable? Or what? Your point is, I think, absolutely valid around we don't know what they are going to bring to the ICMA executive board. But so that part I agree with, but I would, from my experience, and I can't say that all regions operate this way, but I'll speak from my experience. And let me start with the interviewer side. So I was contacted through our Colorado City County Management Association executive director, who said, our president is asking you to be our rep on the regional interviews. So I am not an insider in the sense that I didn't know any of the applicants. Once we get in there, I had the opportunity, as did all interview panelists, to ask any questions beyond the standard ones if we had them. The ICMA reps who were really facilitating the discussion did not lead us in a direction. They did not really speak other than to encourage us to speak during the discussion after the interviews. So I think it comes back to, again, are the state organizations putting forward people who can be critical and interview and be the interviewer and really ask the appropriate questions that get at what the state is concerned about. I'm not going to be able to think of one off the tip of my tongue here.
Sure.
But I think it's important, at least for the Mountain Plains region. I would tell you emphatically, there was no insiders. I had never met the people before. We had good representation. I think that could be different on the committee appointments, because we've got a ton of committees at ICMA, right? And I know really nothing. I know that some of them are very coveted. I have no idea how those people are picked, so I can't speak to that. But I really felt like, or I feel like, on the interviewer panel, it was not the insider. And I also felt when I interviewed, it was not that way. I thought I had great questions. I got good feedback. I didn't get appointed, mainly, as I understand it, on a technicality, because I couldn't follow we already had a Colorado manager, and you can't follow.
That's part of that rotation agreement, right?
Yeah. Unwritten, I think, at this point, but maybe it's written now. So again, I think it's incumbent, if there is insider trading happening, I would say it's because the state organizations, or some places, I think there's other agencies that participate. If those guys are putting in insiders and they know the applicants or whatever, then maybe there's an opportunity. But there was a lot of people on our committee, so even if one of them knew the person, there wasn't the opportunity, and there was enough of us that nobody was going to strong arm the majority of the group. It was fairly unanimous in the interview panel that I was on. And so I do feel good about that process. That, to me, is separate from what does another election process look like? What happens if 8 of us want to run? And how do you run across multiple states? And, how the heck does all of that work? And so I don't know if there's a better process or not. I absolutely agree that we are stuck in a position of, when I get the ballot, I have one name to choose on. So I can either choose to click on the name or not vote, because there's really no reason for me to vote.
Right.
So, is it the best process out there? Can we improve on it? That's, again, I can voice my concern to those if I have one. That's not my place to fall on a sword at the moment. I have other things that I'd rather talk to ICMA folks about. But I, in conclusion, I really just want both you and listeners to know, from my experience, it's not insider trading. It was very transparent within the process in picking that person. And then, again, it is not, I'm repeating myself, but
no, you're good. Yeah. I appreciate that.
Then it hits the membership voters, who could feel disenchanted or disenfranchised, because why am I going to click on one box? It's the primaries in the DN and the R world type of thing.
No, absolutely. Just I want to. I'm glad you had an opportunity to make that point, the yes and the no, right? So
Yep.
I want and I want people to say, hey, I want people to realize that when they listen to my podcast, that I'm not just feeding them what I want them to hear. Like I want them to hear different viewpoints because I learned something from others, and I'm okay with saying I was wrong on something, and we're gonna get to it eventually when we talk about the credential because you told me I was wrong about some stuff on the credential too. I mean, a lot of people don't know, but me and Michael, we had a couple hour phone call several weeks ago. So we've done a lot of chatting, and we see eye to eye on a lot of issues. And he said, hey, no, I disagree with you on this stuff, and I think that's awesome. But to put a final pin in the point on this whole deal with the election process, it would have been very helpful, in my opinion, if candidates could be asked questions about how the James Freed situation was being handled by those who are concerned about that aspect of the organization. Just one little thing. Or, so there's a lot of people out there who are fed up with the whole push on international membership. I don't know how much money and time and resources the organization itself, ICMA, spends on trying to grow its international audience or membership. But I just saw at the Oregon City County Management Association conference a couple weeks ago, there's only literally 180 voting members, international voting members, and of those 180, 135 or something are living in Canada. So it's like you have 45 international members outside of North America or something, or outside of United States, outside of Canada, and yet they have 3 of the 18 board seats. Like that isn't making sense to me. I don't know. It's just anyway. I don't want to beat a dead horse on it.
Well, and I mean, I don't disagree, and I have questions. Again, I don't have enough knowledge to speak in a lot of depth on that. I do, like probably every member does, I have opinions and thoughts about how ICMA can or should focus on the United States and really being the best ICMA organization it can within the states. Getting that, there's probably some analogy of, you don't go build the new garage or the outbuilding and let your leaky roof maintain, right?
Right.
You fix your home up to the best that it can be. And yes, we're an international ICMA, and I'm confident there's value in that. But like any, and I don't have a specific detail to back up the statement, but I'm confident, just like any organization, that there's improvements that can be made within the support of the council manager profession within the United States. And to the extent that the executive board feels like that's as solid as it needs to be at this point, and there's a focus on moving internationally, then that is what the executive board has decided. If somebody were to ask me, I would want to inquire a lot about what is happening within the United States, and how do they feel like they are serving us, which is, this may not be the appropriate terminology, but a lot of the bread and butter for
You're damn
the
right. It's the bread and
organization.
butter. I mean, that's where the bulk of the
So
membership is. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, well, I don't know what the budget. I don't know where the revenues all come from. So that's where I have the slight hesitation in that statement, because I believe there's federal grants that come in that
sure.
support, and there's probably other things.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, that is where, I mean, it's where I work. And so I want the organization that I belong to be maximizing its focus on me, if you will. And I don't mean literally, of course, me,
No,
but the U.S. managers, and making us the best managers that we can be. And whether that's through educate, whatever it is, that would just be my base assumption and hope of where they're at. But again, I don't know enough about some of that, the overall strategic plan. I haven't paid attention since I applied. So,
no,
and
I'm tracking you on that, Michael, but
we'll chat a little. We can probably drill a little bit more into that when we talk about the credentialing as well.
yeah, a couple points that I want to hit before we move to the credential, and I'm not sure if we're going to wrap this up after these and make this part 1 and go to part 2. I'm not sure, Michael, so we'll kind of figure this out. But
Okay.
um, I read hundreds of articles. I read hundreds and hundreds of articles a month, a year. I mean, tons, and I come across stories where this city or this county is exploring adopting the council manager form of government, adopting maybe moving away from it. And I never see ICMA mentioned in an article, in any one of those articles ever. And I
Hmm.
don't, I don't talk about it on LinkedIn because that's not my lane. If you, I mean, I'll bring it up here every now and then, here and there, but I don't. I mean, I could probably point to 24 cities and counties over the last 18 months that I've seen that I've had conversations, and I never see ICMA mentioned whatsoever. Now, maybe they're doing something else behind the scenes that I'm not aware of when it comes to advocacy or defending the council manager form of government. And I hear every time they have a conference, there's supposedly, I've never been to an annual conference, but I hear every time there's a conference that supposedly they talk about, these communities they helped over here and these communities they helped over here with the council manager form of government. But I got to tell you, as somebody, I will say this without a doubt, and I'm not trying to be arrogant. I'm being 100% factual. I am the most well-read city manager in the country when it comes to what's going on in this profession, in this industry. I've never seen ICMA's name mentioned in any of these conversations.
And I'm not going to argue with you on that because I think you're probably are the most heavily read. I just have to look at your RW
RTRs?
RTRs.
Yeah.
Um, and and I'm going to show not my ignorance, but my passiveness related to ICMA. And for years and years, I write my annual dues check. I may or may not go to the conference, depending upon what his schedule looks like. And I've never, until more recently, when I was thinking about or ran for the executive board, I really didn't pay a lot of attention to what the organization was. It's, as you've pointed out numerous times on the podcast, I mean, it's been around for 100 years, and it is or has been the
Only game
go-to.
of town. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you join it and you go to the conferences, and right or wrong, I've never really critiqued or paid attention to the activities of what it's done. And in my defense of that, I have a full-time job. I've been on the state committee. I've been on other things. I've got my family,
Sure.
et cetera. Right. And so I don't,
And the gym too, don't forget, at
yeah.
4:30 in the
And the
morning.
gym at 4:30 in the morning. And so you don't have time to delve into every organization, because I'm pretty confident that if I delved into the Colorado Municipal League, or I'm a huge fan of CCCMA, so I'm not sure I could find fault, but I'm sure I could find fault in there somewhere. Our finance director is part of GFOA, and he'll grind on about some of the silly things that they're doing. And right. So if you spend the time and energy, you can find fault probably in any organization, to the extent that I rely and have relied, right or wrong, on the fact that it is my fellow managers who are
Representing you.
representing us.
Right.
Then collectively, again, you assume best intent. You hope they're making the right decisions that they feel. And until I think it's gone off the rails, I'm probably not going to pay a whole lot of attention.
I think that's fair. That's fair, generally speaking,
And,
right?
right. And yeah, I think that's what most people do in there. And the place that we've really drilled in, and not just me, but I believe there's 17 members on the credentialing advisory board. We've had some tough internal conversations with ICMA staff about, supporting the credentialing program and not diluting it, and creating a level of value that we see that the credentialed program brings to the managers. And again, the people made up of that are all volunteers, and we all read probably a couple dozen reviews a month, and take our time to read that, and then reach out to those members and
You're talking
talk
about
to them about
the
the annual
manager
report.
self-reports, right? Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, yeah. And maybe I probably shouldn't jump into that, but point is that that's the place that I focused in on the organization, because that's where I've been appointed, and really feel both probably passionate and knowledgeable to speak on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Michael, I think I want to hit one issue and come back to that you mentioned earlier in the podcast, and then we can segue into part two, I guess,
Okay.
or whatever the credential here. But earlier in the podcast, you talked about how you're curious to watch the AAME develop and what steps it's going to take when it comes to advocacy for city managers and county managers and so
Correct.
forth and so on. And I don't have an honest answer where I can say this has all been written out and on stone tablets and we're going to do X, Y, and Z or A, B, C. I don't have that for you. I just have a general sense or idea based off of my belief system, my skill sets, and just the things I've witnessed over the last 2 years of being on LinkedIn and the feedback I've received. But there's a few things here that I'd like to touch on, and one is I'm tired of watching city managers take one-way traffic when it goes through the separation process, right? Where they're basically getting bashed left and right in the local media, or there's only one-sided narrative going out there, or it's just even the classic, well, we can't talk about it's a personnel issue, but everyone's like, the average layman thinks that the city manager must have done something wrong. Otherwise, why would they be getting rid of the city manager? Right. And there's a lot of naivete when it comes to the public perception as far as why city managers get dumped or there's separations that occur. And so I definitely want to be stronger in terms of pushing back on earned media narratives when it comes to how city managers are being treated. You got a colleague, AJ Euchert, I believe his name is, up in Dacono, who
Yep.
he just left obviously a little while ago, but he went through a very hellacious situation. I actually did a video clip and put that on my LinkedIn page, and was one of the most, one of my most popular videos of all time, or most popular posts of all time, because the same meeting he was getting like a 20 or 25-year recognition as, for being an employee and all the hard work. 45 minutes later, he's getting shit canned by a council that clearly broke the law. And I think it's been confirmed. I'm not sure where they're at in that investigation with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, or something going on with that. And I'm sure you know more
Hmm.
about it than I do, but the council, many members of the council acted illegally in that process. And nobody came out and publicly came to his defense or anything like that. And it would have been nice if at the time AME existed and we could have done something and pushed back on the narrative and created some publicity on his behalf to explain what's going on. Right now, in all fairness, thankfully, those citizens there in Tacona were top notch, and they went to bat. They did the recall. I mean, I probably shouldn't even mention this case because they are actually one of the exceptions to the rule. They went to the mattress and fought for their city manager and tried to get the recall done, which was successful on where they could get it, and so that was a good situation. But I think that AAME can do a lot of work when it comes to pushing back with earned media and putting the spotlight on the wrongdoings and actions of the governing body members, because those folks, they hate bad media. Politicians hate bad media. They hate bad press. And up to this point in time, they've never had anybody hitting back except for the random stray city manager who decides to get pretty aggressive or digs their heels in. So that's one element for sure. The second element is I think that we need to do better work when it comes to supporting managers with legal resources, access to counsel, possibly even working with funding. I'm getting way ahead of here on a baby organization here, but I would like to see city managers be much more aggressive in pushing back in a court of law when it comes to defamation, when it comes to illegal acts or whatnot. And maybe that's where the AAME comes in. I don't think we can sue on someone's behalf for defamation, but pushing back on some of these open meeting violations and putting pressure on, say, the attorney general in the state to look into it, whereas the city manager can't go and make those headlines, right? The city manager is not going to go out and basically say, hey, Mr. Attorney General or whatever, can you please look into this for me? But I think me, the representative of AAME, we can sort of beat the drum. We can go start getting the public information requests for records and start creating the narrative and push back on that. You follow me on that?
Absolutely, and I'd go back to what I said earlier. I'm not looking for. I assume best of intent, and I've listened to you enough that I have faith in you, which is
Right.
why I joined the organization. And I'm not. I don't need assurance or written tablets of where you're going. I'm going to continue to follow, and everything you just described, I think are valuable things. If I were to peel that apart a little bit, I would say that there's a lot of components in what you said. If AAME could play a strong role in assisting new, and not just new, but managers in developing contract agreements, and really thinking about what does the at will imply
Sure.
and what is for cause and what is not, because a lot of
Absolutely. Yep.
they've defined what cause is in there, and a lot of it's
Very vague and subjective.
very vague and subjective. Or I had in a contract that I teach at CU Denver Graduate School, and a material for cause would have been if I didn't tell the council that I was teaching.
Yeah.
And they knew I teach on a regular basis. And at one point I had to put it in writing. I don't remember the details. And now I just have to let them know. But I mean, I could have been fired for just not telling them that I was teaching, and they know I teach every spring, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not something new. But without the details, there's a lot of creative. And I know you interviewed someone dealing with the housing, And that was one of the ones I was kind of smiling at, because when I was in Frisco in 2004, we partnered in on a house. I mean, the mountain resort communities in Colorado have been doing creative manager partnerships for decades now, but creating a resource and supporting managers who can email you and say, "Hey, I'm entering my first contract. Here's what I think I should be asking for," and there's some dialogue. I think that's an incredible resource. And then, as we've kind of talk around so far, is part of the dysfunction I think that comes from, and there's 100 reasons, right? I'm not saying this is it, but I think we do such a bad job at educating our elected officials, in probably, I'll say, in the nation, and make a generality, and maybe that's true, maybe it's not, that the dysfunction that then happens, and the manager's job is not to keep the council corralled, right? That they're self-policing in that. But if we, again, the collective big we, don't do a good job on the education, it's not just about cancer manager form of government or Robert's Rules of Order or here's how to run a good meeting, right? It's a social interaction that comes from 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, however many independently elected officials, who then are brought together in this room. Some of them could have been on there for years, some just got elected, some could have gotten appointed. And how do you, again, as I've said, how do you constantly educate on that churn? How does the manager, can not how can AAME assist the manager in resources to help on good governance or provide training? We've got a group here, our Metro Mayors Caucus, which is Front Range. I think there's 36 or 37 mayors. They've just and I don't know that I have the facts exactly right, but basically they've directed, I think it's through them, their executive director, to hold a mayor's leadership training. And
Okay.
it's a multi-month thing. I think it's one day. I shouldn't speak to the details because I don't know, but the intent is to raise the quality and the bar on the mayor, and getting them to understand the ultimate role of the mayor, acknowledge the some, in Colorado, some mayors only vote if there's a tie,
Right.
some don't get to vote at all. I mean, you got to take those nuances in. But if we can move back to educating our elected officials to a focus of statesmanship and not political rhetoric.
Or grandstanding, like you alluded to earlier, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we're fixing potholes. We're creating places in communities that people can live and work. I mean, not to drill too much into me, but I think we're doing our job if our citizens get up in the morning. They don't worry about clean water. They don't worry about flushing the toilet. They know there's not going to be a ton of potholes when they drive.
Right.
The wintertime, streets are going to be plowed. There's going to be a well-trained, compassionate human being when they dial 911, whether it's in red or blue. The lights are going to be somewhat signalized, right? Because we don't want them waking up in the morning and going, "Oh, my local government sucks."
Right.
They've got their families to do. They've got to take their kids to soccer. They've got to go work their job. They got to maintain their relationship, whatever is their life. That's what our job should be. And so how do we collectively educate our councils to focus on policy and statesmanship? How do we go back to, I don't know that the olden days were of yore, but get to a place where it's not the rhetoric and politics and grandstanding of whatever fashion that is. And you've posted numerous examples that just make you cringe in the actions of those elected officials. And I don't know that the education is going to solve it, but I feel like it would move the dial. And that's certainly a role. If you guys decide to undertake it as AAME, I think you could really make a difference in the profession, not necessarily, and really tie into the council manager form of government. So
Yeah.
maybe that's a post James Freed opportunity to partner with ICMA.
Yeah. There's been a lot of opportunities for sure. And I want to I'm gonna miss if I don't take care of this right now. I'm gonna forget. But you mentioned Frisco again, where you used to work, and also the snow piles. I gotta tell you, my wife and I, we were traveling through the mountains one time, and we almost got caught in a blizzard up in Frisco. And I was like, I asked this like back many years ago, and I told my wife, I was like, hey, can you call Frisco and try to get? I forget what I was trying to get her to find out. But I wanted to call City Hall for some reason to get me some information because I was like, I think maybe like where the next chain station was going to be, or I wasn't sure what the hell was going to happen, right?
Okay.
And God bless my wife. She ends up calling Frisco, Texas. And they're like, what the hell's going on? I'm like, no, babe, Frisco, Colorado. Like,
So, so when the internet was first coming up, so I started in Frisco in 2004, I think. I was there for about 9 years. And it would, we, Frisco, Texas is an amazing community. If folks haven't been there, what has happened in that community over the last couple of decades is just, you're awestruck when you see what they've done collectively. But they had a lot more than Frisco, Colorado did back in the early 2000s. And the Google searches would come up with Frisco, Texas, and Frisco, Colorado was nowhere to be found. But even with that, more than once and probably several times a year, we would get calls from Frisco, Texas residents
uh
asking for whatever they were looking for, trash removal. I don't know.
huh.
So but I will tell you that there's only one city of Castle Pines in the entire nation. There is no other community with the Castle Pines title. So we have it
No
right.
problem there, right? No problem
No
there.
problem there. Absolutely.
Oh, there are getting back to the education thing, but there are different things that we can do with AAME to educate the governing body. Heretofore, I've been primarily focused on educating the idea of educating and advocating on the core direct impact of the city manager as far as their contracts and things of that sort of nature, benefits and what have you. But I definitely think there's a place for trying to make meetings better, more effective, more efficient, because obviously that makes life easier for the manager, makes business easier, and so forth and so on. And you're right, I do think there's areas that we can collaborate, also with the state municipal leagues and things of that sort of nature.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and man, we're getting long on this one, so I hope the audience is okay with this one, this episode here.
Or you can break it up.
Yeah, I mean, we might have to break up into 4 different parts. I don't know, but I will circle back to a couple other things I wanted to touch on with respect to AAME advocacy for the city manager. I am increasingly troubled by how subordinates can essentially defame and lie about a city manager and what they've done and their performance, and get articles written about it and get investigations started and damage the reputations of these folks. There's a situation down. I'm gonna name it. I won't name his name. I don't know if I should or not. But I'm in Boynton Beach or where, Florida. We have a city manager who was getting lit up by an HR director who was engaging in shenanigans whereby she was soliciting campaign donations from staffers because she was running for elected office in another city nearby. And then when she was getting called out on it, she wanted to play the race card and claim that she was being targeted because she's black and it was a racist, city and racist city manager and racist assistant city manager. And I think there's something to be said for city managers to start filing lawsuits, defamation lawsuits against subordinates who basically think they can say whatever the hell they want and there are no consequences, there's no punishment. And that's something I really want to focus on a little bit. I think, Michael, again, putting that into the future here. And then I want to come back and say that, there's a saying, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yep.
This is where I really think AAME could really maybe move the needle. And that is where we have a founding, not founding member, so we have any member of the AAME says, hey, Joe, I'm having a problem with my council, because a lot of times these things don't just happen overnight. A lot of times a city manager doesn't always just get blindsided out of the blue. It happens.
Agreed.
Don't get me wrong. It does. I mean, we saw that with AJ Ukert, right? For example, in Tacoma. But a lot of times it's a slow build, right? It just starts building and then becomes this tension. And I do think there's a place possibly for AAME to interject itself almost as like an arbitrator or to create some sort of intermediary discussion between the mayor or the governing body and the city manager and try to find out like, hey, what's going on here? Can we fix this? Because at the end of the day, turnovers and separations and severance agreements, nobody really benefits from that. Like, it's not good for anybody to go through that sort of turnover. And I think if we can start having conversations with some of these elected bodies and say, hey, we want to help get through, almost like this sounds embarrassing maybe to say, but almost like a couples therapy session, right? Where you bring on a counseling session. Like, is there a way to reconcile some of these differences to prevent a turnover, right? Or to ease a transition out so it's not so publicly negative or damaging to the reputation of the city manager or the county manager? Because at the end of the day, what I want to see us do at AAME is minimize and prevent the reputational damage that's occurring and the harm that's coming to our careers when we go through these nasty separations. And I think we need to have some adult conversations with these elected officials and say, hey, we realize that we can be fired at any time we want to, that you want to get rid of us. So we serve at your pleasure. We understand that, right? Let's just do it the right way. Let's just do it the right way, that is a mature adult, so that you guys can get to go to where you want to go, and then the manager can go and start a new chapter with a clean slate without having to deal with that damage. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Absolutely, and I agree 100%. Your story about the HR director, this was years ago, but we had a manager who took a position, and there was a long-term finance director who was friends, small community, and it didn't take long for that finance director to get the council to oust the city manager based on I don't know the details, but overall probably not accurate representation, but more a desire for, these are my words, not real necessarily, but power, or potentially wanting to be the city manager or
Right.
town manager, whatever
Right.
that is. I don't know really what you do with employees in that situation. What comes to mind is really thinking, going back to kind of the components of a manager's tenure. So the role that AAME plays in helping get that contract started, and I know ICMA has I can't remember what they call it, but they have a standard
Template.
contract template. I don't know how dated it is. I haven't looked at it in a while, so I can't speak to it. But I think there's a role that we can really beef that up, and even providing municipal contract lawyer to look at that and help define what cause is, just as an example, or to
Yes,
have
sir.
clear language on if you're entering into a contractual agreement on a housing loan, or sharing in the equity growth or loss of a house and purchasing it together, or whatever, just as another example. And then you've got what you were describing, when it starts to go sideways, how do you insert yourself and help that? Now it's not just about the manager, but it is about the manager, but it's really, is there a way to go in and look at that situation, and what's the role of the city attorney in doing that? And how do you play, doing the analysis to say, is this a dysfunctional council? Is this a manager that's not following the council directives? What are the dynamics in here? And is there a role for AAME? And then when you get to the place closer, and I would agree with what you said, I think in a lot of cases, the manager can tell you it's coming. It may
Right.
not be a long term, but in what role, when I was let go in Littleton, I didn't have a HR attorney on speed dial, right?
Right.
I'd call some friends and say, hey, who do you guys use, and got a couple of recommendations. So just having that resource to say, hey, I didn't expect it to go sideways, but it did. I need
Now
some
what?
assistance.
Yeah.
I need some assistance in, making a determination. Do I have a case? Do I not have a case? What do I want to be the manager who sued the municipality? And what does that do to my next job opportunity? And
Absolutely.
just provide that advice. And that's, at least in Colorado, I would say that's non-existent. I don't want to speak for other states, because other state organizations may or may not provide some of those components of service delivery. But I see a huge space for an organization such as AAME to come in and really support. And since your focus is on the professional, really support in all of those veins that you just spoke to. And there's probably dozens more that the
Yeah.
listeners could email you and go, hey, don't forget about this. This is
No,
an
yeah,
issue.
yeah, absolutely,
But
Michael, and that is at the top of my list. In fact, I haven't really talked about it much on the podcast and what have you, but yeah, getting lining up legal representation and contractual templates and guidance on that is definitely at the top of the list of things that we want to do, and get prepared to be able to provide that value to our members, for sure. Absolutely. All right, Michael. So we're getting a little long in the tooth on this episode. We were talking for quite a while, and we still have a lot of ground to cover. I'm going to wrap up this episode, part one here, and we're going to move on to the next one. So I'm Joe Turner. This is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. If you like my content, please hit that subscribe or follow button. Please leave a rating and review. And we'll catch you in part two with Michael Penny, City Manager for Castle Pines, as we talk about the Credential Manager program with the ICMA.